Hello, everybody. Welcome to part three of the cold climate fruit webinar series. We'll get started here in about a minute, just waiting for some more people to join. And then we'll get into introductions and Kerik will get started on his talk. All right, a couple people still joining. We'll just go ahead and get started so we don't go too much over time. All right, so my name is Josie Dillon. I'm the statewide fruit outreach specialist with UW-Madison Extension. And today I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Kerik Cox from Cornell University to talk a little bit about organic fire blight and apple scab management. Let's go to the next slide. So this, like I was just saying, this is part of our cold climate fruit webinar series. This is our third webinar. There will be one more happening in April. All of these recordings are available on our website at fruit.wisc.edu/webinars/apples. Next slide. All right, so Dr. Kerik Cox is a professor of plant pathology at Cornell University. He's also the program lead of the Cornell Agritech section of plant pathology and plant microbiology. Next slide. Our next webinar will feature Megan Luke, who will talk a little bit about achieving maximum sprayer effectiveness, mostly using air blast sprayers. Talk a little bit about calibration and kind of best practices related to that. That'll be Friday, April 10th from noon to 1 p.m. Central Time. Next slide. Yeah. I also wanted to point out we are having another webinar kind of in between this one and the April 10th one. Courtney Meeks is Dr. Leslie Holland's PhD candidate doing some research in shoot thinning and fungal disease management. So keeping the theme of Friday webinars, we'll have that one on Friday, March 27th from noon to 12:30, where she'll give a little bit of a research update and what she's been seeing in vineyards in Wisconsin. And one more series here is our Emerging Berry Crops Winter Webinar series. There's one more remaining webinar on April 2nd featuring a farmer panel. Again, this will be for berry crops. So if you want to hear from some farmers around the state, talk about some of their growing, maintenance, best practices, etc., feel free to join that one as well. Reminder before we begin to mute and use the Q&A chat to ask questions. If you do have another kind of go through, we can use the chat for participation purposes. Follow-up email will include any responses to unanswered questions, links to resources, and webinar recording. At the very, very end, so after that April 10th webinar, we'll also be sending out an evaluation link and would greatly appreciate if you fill that out as well. So last slide here, just thank you for joining, and I will pass it off to Dr. Leslie Holland to introduce Kerik Cox. I also forgot to mention Aria Brescia is here. She is our organic outreach specialist with UW Extension, and she'll be available kind of monitoring the chat and offering some technical assistance. All right, Leslie, off to you.
Great, thank you, Josie and Kerik. I know getting your slides all loaded up here. Introduce you once again. Thanks so much for coming back. Kerik Cox is his principal research efforts include applied disease management for apples and small fruit with a focus on alternative management practices. Additionally, a considerable portion of his efforts are concerned with practical or field antimicrobial resistance to agricultural fungicides and antibiotics. His extension efforts focus on biopesticide education, antimicrobial resistance, disease forecasting, and applied disease management with an emphasis on apples and controlled environment production and small fruit. He also has a significant teaching effort, including undergraduate and graduate level plant pathology and IPM courses, as well as faculty leadership. So, Kerik, thank you so much with that busy schedule of yours. Thank you so much for once again joining us. And I think this topic is going to be a really exciting one for our attendees today.
Well, thanks, Leslie, and I'm real excited to jump into it. When I made the talk, I was like, wow, we don't have as many options for organic apple scab, or I haven't been testing as many. And so it's been kind of nice to put it together because it's sort of informing what I'd like to do because I've been giving a lot of talks on organic fire blight, and a lot of people want to know about what you can do for apple scab organically the whole time. If I make a mistake, Ariana, jump in and make sure I don't mess up the organic stuff if I have misdone something. So just jump in anytime. Unless we get significantly derailed, I'll probably just answer the questions in the chat as they're pertinent, and then we'll get to the end and we'll answer a few more. The nice thing about these sort of hour-long presentations is I don't have to speed run everything. We have extra time. I'll show you some products, but I'm going to give you what we do or what I tell organic people to do or what I'm doing myself based on what farmers have said to me that works and that makes sense with the science that I have. And so here we go. What are we going to talk about first? I want to start off with general management practices, and then I want to talk a little bit about biopesticides and how making them work, because they're going to be one of your bigger tools that I think we need to go for in the future of organic research. Yes, we can do copper and sulfur, but the whole premise and the kind of ideology of doing organic is kind of flies in the face of putting metals and on the ground and in our environment, or hitting everything with sulfur, which if you spray it, it's awful and very caustic. So I'm going to really dive in hard on trying to figure out how to make the biopesticides work and which ones aren't going to be the most impactful, in my opinion, to the environment. So let's start with our general management practices. Then we'll do scab, and then we'll go fire blight, and I'll tell you about if we have extra time, you'll see all the product research and stuff that we're pumping out on fire blight. Even if we don't cover it, yep, the team can more than happy to, I'll send them the slide deck and they can share it all. So one of the things I really like to start with is I went and did a tour in China, and one of the most, and I've learned this myself, when my pathology orchards used to look like this, and now my pathology orchards look like these tall spindle, high density type plantings. And I've come to realize I didn't want to do high density plantings at first because sometimes the untreated checks didn't get a lot of apple scab, and it makes for a very terrible test that's hard to show differences in products. But then when I began to think, I was like, wait a minute. If I go to high density, I might be able to make organic and biological work just because they're so much better for the fruit color. You get better yield per acre. Agrochemical applications, I have learned that this is so much easier to spray than this mess that you see over here. Yeah, and air circulation and drying time. One of the things I always like to tell growers, and they'll agree with me, is that air is the best fungicide, and air is completely organic. You can absolutely, it's allowed in organic agriculture. You can use air and drying any situation. Impact on the environment is minimal with using air. Wonderful, wonderful tool. Let's take advantage of it. If you learned anything today, if you have this, start transitioning to that. That seems to have made everything a lot easier for doing really low input and disease management trials. I find that my colleagues that are still on this side of the fence are finding that nothing works and they're struggling with the products, and the ones that are on this side of the fence or Canadians can make it happen. The other thing, always make sure to start off with horticulture first. If you take away anything, it's hort is super important. Water management, pick the best sites, tile your orchards, manage your drip irrigation appropriately. Don't do it too much, don't do it too little. You really got to get anything that's dead in your block, you have to remove it. Manage the weeds, mow the orchard. This picture here, the weeds were about 2 feet tall because we had a crisis at the station, and this might have been during COVID, and they couldn't mow the orchards, and that just really increased disease pressure. This individual here, you can tell this was an organic planting because they're using non-treated wood. They thought, like, I just want these few extra rows of apples. But what ended up happening is this spot was low. It flooded. Then the black stem borer came in, started wrecking the apples, and then the apples got fireball, and more black stem borer came in. This died and then spread pest and disease everywhere. So if it's not a good piece of land, don't plant it because it can threaten the rest of your the rest of your planting as well. Always use less susceptible cultivars. We have a lot of resistance cultivars for apple scab. These are links, but I don't want to click on them because it'll disrupt the flow. But if you had this talk, you could look at the different susceptible cultivars, and things like black rot tend to be very few cultivars have resistance to it. There's resistance to scab, but there's not a lot of resistance to other diseases. But in my case, if you want to go for organic, pick something that doesn't get a lot of scab. No Macintosh, no Empire, no Macintosh parentage anywhere. Maybe even avoid Cortland and find different things. There are a nice list of susceptible cultivars, but they don't often cover fly speck, sooty watch, and black rot, unfortunately. But this is a tool. If you have this thing, you can click on it and you can put in the disease and see how your varieties fare in terms of susceptibility to different types of pathogens. This is another one here. It shows Cortland's. Oh, moderately, highly. Oh, Cortland is just not a good choice. Look at Cox Orange Pippin's not bad, but it has other issues as well, depending on the disease. So just, be aware of what the limitations and potential is of your different cultivars in your plantings. Okay, number one, I even probably showed this slide twice. We'll go through it very fast the first time. No matter what you do, take extra care to remove any fruit drops. Get rid of the leaf litter as best as you can. And dead prunings. All of these different things here are inoculum, not just for apple scab, but for fruit rots and other garbage. And what you're seeing in this picture is not America. This is Brazil, where they're like, Kerik, you told us to remove all this stuff. So we've built these tractors that will sweep all the garbage to the middle of the row and then we'll nuke it. And you can see how these sort of paddles on the back of these machines will just move to the orchard, sweep it to the middle, and it's going to come down and do that one. And then they'll chop it up and put some urea on it to degrade it. And just getting rid of that inoculum is going to be huge in terms of fighting your battle against disease without even spraying the first chemical. You're just going to walk up to this and be in the best position. So they were doing that. If you click on these links, if you have the talk, you will watch videos from YouTube that will demonstrate these pieces of equipment. And then they're not, and there's a lot of different ways. But what we tend to do is we go fall or spring, leave shredding with a flail mower, rake into the middle, scalp the side, or you can put a urea at 140 pounds per 100 or dolomitic lime at 2.5 pounds per acre. This is mostly for scab, but this is going to help degrade, use the natural microbes in the environment to degrade all this other junk and pathogens that you don't want. They can use the free nitrogen to eat this stuff up. And so that's one of some of the bigger things you can do. I've heard of people asking for other types of materials and practices, but I just don't think they've been validated in the literature for the years. And you might ask, well, how do I know if I want to do fall or spring? That question is asked by when you can get into the orchard. If you can better get into the orchard in the fall, do it in the fall. Don't wait to the spring. If right now is your only chance and it's not a mushy mess, it's a mushy mess here, then the spring is kind of out. But you want to get in, and once the snow melts, and get those materials out there so you can start taking advantage of the natural degradation by microorganisms. And the other thing you can do is spray delayed dormant copper. And you kind of want a product that's at least 15% metallic copper equivalent. There are many organic coppers. You have a lot of options for this. This is going to get in there and it's going to take out any scab inoculum inside buds. It's going to take oozing cankers right around silvertip, and we'll see this ad nauseum in a minute. Once we dump into the apple scab, I'll tell you about the different things. Pick the thicker copper that causes more injury. You can do the soaps, but I'd save those for later. One of these, sort of like a co-side, is about 15%, or pick an organic one. Badge X2 is the one we like to use for our organic copper that has a beast, a nice metallic copper equivalent. That's its percentage copper, and can really get in there and provide you some residue to get that season off and going. And with that, those are my main tips. And we'll see briefly again. I'm going to jump past them and when we get to the apple scab if we recover the thing. So let's talk about how I would go about managing apple scab organically. Number one, obviously, don't plant Macintosh. Number two, plant high density. Number three, we'll talk about the leaf litter again. But before we get into that, I want to talk about the biopesticides and what they are, because they're going to be one of the tools I think we should move towards. minimum risk, and grass. What are all these things? This is the EPA's definition of a biopesticide, naturally occurring derived pesticidal substance. And you're going to find that they're plant extracts, minerals, microorganisms, and what not be allowed in organic, but is allowed as a biopesticide are plant incorporated protectants. We don't really have any transgenes in the apple world that we're really working with, so you don't really need to worry about those. They're not going to be in anything that you would accidentally be growing. And they all vary in cost, type, efficacy. But the great thing about them is they tend to go for multiple targets in an organism, which means low risk for fungicide resistance. You're not going to get resistance to these types of things. You're going to get them. This is where you can find a list of different items, but they're going to be better in your production guides that you have at UW. What is this one? You might have heard people talking about grass. This is our FDA food additives, but they have pesticidal properties. So you can use them in food. They're incredibly safe. This is another popular one step further way to go. And many of the biopesticides are also listed as grass products as well. And then finally, you have EPA minimum risk, fit for 23. They're exempted inert ingredients that seem to have some pesticidal properties. But this will be stuff like white mineral oil, and this will be like thyme and cinnamon oil, things that make your orchard smell good while doing an okay job of controlling disease. I'm going to say okay because we're going to get some disease. And so we're in the apple world, and different materials that they could work on would be stuff like fire blight, powdery mildew, fly speck sooty blotch, cedar apple rust. I don't know. That one's really beastly. That's going to be a challenge for organic. But thank goodness you didn't ask me to talk about that today. Because we don't have a really good answer. Get rid of the cedars is the best. But how do these things work? There's 3 general modes of actions typically. And they will take a microbe and ferment it in a soup and put it under extreme duress and kind of torture natural antibiotics out of the microorganisms. And then they'll formulate these products, and you'll store them in your, usually I put them in a fridge if you had a pesticide shed, or a cold storage. And then you will use them, and their fermented products are what's actually doing the killing. It's kind of like making a natural antibiotic. I mean, they're not streptomycin, they're different things, and they're different bacteria that make them. But the companies will take them, put them under a stress situation. They'll make the antimicrobial metabolite. They'll formulate that soup and just either see this working really well in fire blight. It's definitely my #1 pick. You're like, wait, you don't advocate first for antibiotics? No, I think this is better on a variety of different reasons. Sustainability, and it works just as well. Competitive inhibition, but it only really works great on stuff like flowers, where you can really coat these flowers with an endemic microorganisms that you've just grown up in large numbers and put an endemic beneficial back into the orchard. It's like this beneficial already lives in the orchard. You're just boosting its population and making it squish out fire blight. Or if you do mummyberry, there's some of these can work pretty well in mummyberry as well, if you're a blueberry person. Finally, the one that sounds awesome and is the weakest is the defense inducers. These will turn on the plant defenses, and they're not as good as our defenses. They're not like, they're not really effective like, what are those things, vaccines and other stuff. It's kind of like more of a echinacea. The body gets worked up to a point where it produces some kind of weak defenses. The cool thing about them is they work inside the plant. So you can turn these on and get a little bit of benefit once an organism gets inside. If a pathogen gets inside the plant, spraying stuff on the surface, unless it's one of these, isn't really going to do you much. So, for the most part, almost everything we'll use in the biopesticides are protectants. They're going to get on the tissue and protect against new infections, or they can eradicate pathogens on the surface. They'll have limited persistence, which means you'll need to spray them more frequently. Here's some different ones that we have. You might have heard of double nickel, Serenade, Serafil, Tegro, Blossom Protect, Fracture, Aviv. These are all the bacteria that have been kind of coerced into making antibiotics. Stylet oil, various essential oils like thyme and cinnamon sometimes show up on the FDA list. And why do you recommend high density as an advantage over scab? Whoa, high density is great because you just get better movement. The trees are smaller, and as long as you prune them openly, you'll get a lot more air than the low density. Yeah, if I want to make my efficacy trials fail, I will go in high density and practice inoculum production, and I hardly get any scab. And that's sort of my general feeling for that, George. I see that question. And then polyoxin D is sort of a natural organic allowed um, sort of antibiotic type material. Finally, the next one. There's a lot of defense inducers out there. And like I mentioned, they're going to work internally on plant defenses. And there are unnatural ones and natural defense inducers as well. The Actigard is not allowed in organic agriculture because it's a synthesized salicylic acid derivative. The others will often mimic a fake plant attack and then turn on the symptoms. Like Lifeguard is a bacterium, and the plant thinks it's being attacked by a bacterial disease and it turns on defenses. Same with Harpin protein or employ. Or Regalia is an extract from a knotweed. If not used too carefully, could thin your crop, but I think that problem has long been resolved. And then things like Vaxaplant are these types of things that are naturally turning on defense inducers. The other thing that's really great that you can't access and is wonderful for fire blight, but I've had to take it off all the slides, as the Apogee. This gibberellic acid inhibitor, the GA47 inhibitor, Apogee or Kudos, they can really get in there and slow plant growth down and prevent the invasion of tissues by pathogens like fire blight. And that's principally what it's used for. But we won't dwell on that because you're not going to do it. What else we got? We already talked about this. Let's don't do it again. Before, I can barely get apple scab in this type of situation. Even when the trees get about 4 and 6 years old, they just don't drop the leaf litter, even if they're closer together. As long as you do a good job of pruning, or if you're really progressive, you hedge these things so that they're like a narrow fruiting wall, and you keep them short, and you just walking by picking apples, and everyone can reach all the apples, and they pick, and it just makes it that much easier. If they get like this, yeah, it's just a nightmare. All right, what else? We already talked about this. I'm not going to go over it ad nauseum, but always use disease forecasting tools. Use the NUA. We've already seen the types of things it can do. It'll tell you when the pathogens become mature, when they're blasting through the air, and when infection occurs, whether it's fire blight or apple scab. Now, climate change can be challenging, or climate resilience. The weather is very weird. Earlier in the week, we had 70. Now we got 25, and it's now snowing finally again. And these types of changes can play havoc with the model because the pathogens can't respond as quickly and the trees can't respond as quickly. And so they're off a little bit, but they're still really good, and they're your best options for really getting in there with the precision and effectiveness of management applications. It's going to be so much better over a calendar schedule. And then we've seen NUA. I won't go through that again. We already spent an hour on that. And now I'm going to dive right into scab. We're going to talk about what I'd tell you to do for scab, how and when. It's a big problem in cool, wet, temperate regions like ours. Done. Unfortunately, everybody who wants to eat things, eat apples, sometimes get apple scab. A lot of the really nice apple scab resistant apples, just people don't want to buy or eat. They're just not as palatable. They don't store as well, and they don't look as pretty. And then conventional, if you were conventional, you'd be looking at 10 plus 4 fungicide applications a year. To do it really well in organic, or you either need some form of apple scab resistance, or you're looking at more maybe like 14 plus biopesticide applications a year. I mean, you can gum it up with sulfur and copper, but let's try to think about getting away from those for a while. We use them, let's just don't overuse them. All right, so how does this thing live? This is where it lives. If it wasn't snowing again right now, my orchards would look like this. It's like, where's the leaf litter? It's down there. But one of the things that's really great is keeping a good herbicide strip. This is not a high density one. This is one of our older plantings. And you're like, what was that used for? Look at that dead thing. That's used for fire blight. We had to keep them pretty far apart because we don't want fire blight to spread amongst our plots. So anyway, but you can imagine leaf litter down here. And in that leaf litter are these disgusting apple scab lesions. They look around. You can't really identify them. And they'll make this gross fruiting body. And inside this fruiting body, as the buds break, the fungus has matched its development to eject those silly ascospores that you hear about in the models so much. They'll fly through the air when it rains, and when they mature, and they will land on leaves and developing fruit and cause infections and all kinds of other things. And once they cause that first infection, they'll sporulate again and make a second spore and spread all around your orchard some more. Everything that happens with apple scab is local. It's your farm's thing, the next door farm is unlikely to be able to impact what your apple scab situation is like. Fire blight might travel a little bit, but it's kind of rare. It also stays fairly local as well. So whatever you're doing on your farm last year will impact how hard it is to do scab the next year. So we're going to show a couple different pictures. And this is our apple scab cycle. You saw the leaf litter. You saw the silly ascospore ejecting fungal fruiting bodies. They're going to come out, hit the early developing teas. That's why we're always going at green tip, because these things mature around green tip and there's tissue to infect. They'll cause second infections, which rip out of the leaves and then continue to infect all summer if you don't get a handle on it. It's always good to assume that there's always a little bit of infection, even if you can't see it. But starting things off, the reason we recommend the urea and the copper is to get rid of initial inoculum. And in the disease epidemiological world, let's say you had apple scab in your plot and it could go from 0 to 100, and then you have harvest down here. What these practices do, theoretically, if disease were to develop over time and it would really get fast as it gets to that secondary period, it would start to develop normally, and about halfway to harvest, you'd already be looking at 50% and then 100. But if you do this early inoculum reduction with urea or copper to get rid of overwintering garbage, what you effectively do is you take this curve and you push it a little closer to harvest. And what you would like to do, it doesn't matter if this is apple scab or like cucurbits, the same principle applies. Maybe do copper, and then it pushes it a little further than urea, or not, or the same. This is all hypothetical. Or if you do both, the idea of doing both is to push that curve so close to harvest that when you're actually spraying all this garbage, you're only dealing with a very low level of inoculum that you can completely squash with organic practices. And so that's kind of the idea. Now, the second phase is if you get to this awful situation, these are when the things start really ramping up. If you're able to you'll put on some protective fungicides, and this will help a little bit with shifting the curve some. But when they start to make that secondary phase, the curve gets really steep fast. But if you can put on an antisporulent fungicide, and there are products of the biological realm that will do this as well, they'll kill the germinating spores. You can take that curve and start to smush it. So the idea is you do all these practices, try to stop these secondary cycles to both push the curve forward to the end and make it fly flat. So you don't have to, you get you're at 0 at harvest, and that's what you want. So that's what we're going to talk about how to do. We've already talked about the best cultivars. If you want some apple scab resistant cultivars, here are some of the very popular ones. I found that Topaz is very delicious to eat. Honeycrisp gets a lot, doesn't have any scabs. This is a good one to do, but it will rot in front of your face in the season if it gets really sugary and it gets hot and warm. But all these other ones are scab resistant. Honeycrisp is scab resistant. It's a different type of resistance for the most part, and it gives you kind of immunity through apple scab through a single gene. You want to spray just a little bit so that your single gene product doesn't get ruined for years to come. The other thing that's frustrating is that some of these are great against apple scab, but stuff like Topaz, the scion will melt to Phytophthora root rot very quickly, and then we have had a hard time establishing it in New York. So it's great resistance to scab, susceptibility to 8 different things. There are others that are resistant to rusts as well, and so that kind of stuff is interesting. So what I would do is if you want to buy one of these, I'd eat them all and see which ones you think your consumer would like before planting them. Okay, we did the leaf litter. I'm not going to do it again. We already talked about this again. So once you get into the meat and potatoes of it, we're going to be talking about taking those curves and shifting and flattening them. And you're going to do that by using a bunch of different, oh, no, not sulfur. I got to fix that. That's what happens. If no one notices, I'll just get rid of that right there. And the ones that you can use are organic are the first two. And I'll highlight them in green right now. Look at that. There we go. I hate sulfur. Got to fix that later. So anyway, and then later, you got antisporulent fungicides in bloom. In your case, this is all going to be, once you get past your copper and sulfur, I recommend these early, and then I recommend you dial them back into some of the other biopesticides, and we'll talk about this briefly. If you're in a conventional world, you're going to start using all these single-site fungicides, but you're not. So in this case, it's going to be biopesticides with antisporulent properties and ability to kill for the rest of the time. We talked about NUA. There's the apple scab page again. If I could highlight that, I would, but I can't without going out of the screen again. And then it'll predict your maturity, ejection, and infection events. And we've talked about this in the previous one. It's going to give you a warning based on the forecasted weather. If it doesn't rain, the warning was no good. or you got lucky and you didn't get it. And then the models truly only predict those ascospores, but I found that over time they actually work on both spore stages pretty okay. And they're going to give you some basic information about the maturity and ejection. You don't really want to know any more of that. And as you all know, with real weather forecasting, about 3 to 5 days out, it's anyone's guess as to whether or not it rains. 1 to 2 days out is when you really want to keep your eyes focused on the model. And, they're going to tell you there's infection periods every week, but only apply at the highest infection periods, not every one. Now, if you're an organic, you may want to consider lighter infection periods as potential threats. So if you're in conventional, the big infection period window is 15 to 20% or 2 inches of rain. I would say in organic, I would move it back down to maybe 10 to 15% ascospore ejection. You're always going to want to put something on. Always use common sense with any model. Make sure you worry about this, but if you're a conventional grower, spraying after an infection period can lead for selection. The biopesticides and the other types of coppers and sulfurs, you don't have to worry about resistance. So you could spray afterwards, but you'll get a lot of infections that you're struggling to clean up later. Okay, so this is what you do if you're conventional. Oh, wow, you get to rotate all this stuff. Fortunately, I've made this one for you. So what you'll want to do is sort of the big overview. Start with sanitation the year before or in the spring. And you're like, wow, what happened? Conventional only has 2 coppers. You know what? I think if you're going to use copper, let's get it out there early on. 1 at silver, 1 at green. And we go to 1/2-inch green at Geneva with no impacts of copper. Because from the rest of that point on, could throw in a sulfur or 2, but sulfur is really gross. And we will talk about when to use sulfur and in what situations. I would just start walking my biopesticides through, and you're like, God, it looks like there's about 8 total between 1/2-inch green or tight cluster and second cover. Yeah, you're going to have to go very frequently. The farmers that I've known that have been able to do this are using the biopesticides, and they're almost going every 5 days, 4 if it rains a lot. But they don't complain, and they're getting good control. So that makes sense to me. So I'm going to pass along their advice as information. We've already talked about the urea, but if you wanted to see it again, 40 pounds per 100 gallons or 2.5 tons of dolomitic lime to the acre of the dolomitic lime. Yeah. And you want the silver tip delayed dormant copper. Bam, we already talked about that. And you're going to want to push your copper a little bit into the rest of the season. And we'll see that in a moment. And this is what I'm recommending. Green tip, 1/2-inch green every 5 to 7 days, organic copper. You can use your high coppers at first. If you want to use the other low coppers later in the season, you can. If you get one of these big, greater than 15% ascospore ejections, 5 days of rain, you got to go again. I think they're just going to wash it all off. Definitely, if it's a biopesticide, if you have 5 days of rain on copper, you can just consider it's gone. All right, what if you have a big one again? Okay, if you got the big time, again, when you're a tight cluster to bloom, this is where I'd say let's use our organic sulfur. Maybe let's do 7 pounds per 100 gallons at that rate for the big or the 5 days of rain. Microthiol disperse is OMRI listed. It's my favorite one to spray. There are others as well. You can use liquid lime sulfur. I tend to like this one. I find this is a really easy to use product. I have not been given the opportunity to try many, but I do like that one. It might be premium. It might cost more money, but the better you are at getting the material out of the tank and on the trees, the more value you'll get out of the product. Okay, if you have a light period from tight cluster to bloom, I'm recommending use a biopesticide. And I like the ones that are liquids. These would include things like Stargus Eco Swing and Double Nickel LC. The liquid ones go in the tank, and when you look in the bottom of the tank, they're always gone. There's not going to be a sludge due to poor mixing. These are super easy to use, and they mix in your water really, really well. I've had really good success with all of those. And a few others that are liquids as well that are coming to market. All right, let's get to petal fall to second cover. Now, at this point, this is a part of the period where you could damage your fruit because you're past thinning and you have 10 to 15 millimeter fruit, and maybe you're not growing cider apples that you want to turn into potatoes, and you want to sell them for a fresh market. You don't want anything that's going to russet. So if you have a big hammer event, I'm going to recommend big ascospore release, even at second cover. Move your model so that it's still pretending like the season is still going. Adjust your dates. and watch and see what kind of ascospore ejection is predicted. Or 5 days of rain. I recommend Ozo polyoxin D, zinc. Get a little bit of zinc in there. It is a very strong organic allowed antibiotic type material. And howler, Pseudomonas chlorophyllus. This makes a analog, a natural version of what we would consider a very fancy single site fungicide. So that's what I recommend for those hard days. A light day. Oh, we got mildew. If you have varieties where mildew is a problem, let's say you're near the Great Lakes. I don't have no idea if Wisconsin's not. I'm just kidding. If you're near the lakes or near a shore, you might have more problems with mildew because of the drying and the wind. In this case, back to your sulfur, 7 pounds per 100. If the temperature exceeds 85 degrees Fahrenheit, you could be in trouble. And if that happens, you got to dial back on your sulfur because you could damage something. If it's a really light period, pick back with those liquid biopesticides, Stargust, EcoSwing, Double Nickel, many, many more. The list goes on forever. I can just keep listing them. The liquids are easier to use. That's what I'm recommending. And now let's sound like a broken record. Same thing. Now watch out here on this early season. I'm recommending, I probably should have put 5 to 7 days for petal fall to second cover as well. You're going to want a tighter interval than your conventional friends. You just want to not have your specialty crop wrecked. If I could edit this now, and I probably won't, I just put that in there. I'll do it for the next webinar. Third to fifth cover. Yep, organic. I think at this point you can back off a little bit because the pressure is a little bit weaker. And while I would tell a conventional grower 14 to 21 days, I'd say you guys watch it on 7 to 14. If you get greater than 5 days or 5 inches of rain, once you get here, models will tell you nothing about ascospores. You won't know. You can kind of make them track infection events. But what I look for is I look for 5 days of rain. I look for 1.5 inches of rain. If this is predicted in the forecast, you go hard with the Oso and the howler. Less than, you can use a different biopesticide. And you might ask, well, can I be effective with just these? You absolutely can be effective with just these. It just depends on how much of a risk taker you are, if you will. And I've had excellent success with just going all the way with Double Nickel, Stargust, and EcoSwing, and many, many more. But you want to go something that can be a potentially a little more powerful, hit those. But this is the time of the year where you don't have to worry too much. And then one other thing. So if you're in this period of time, it's time to start scouting for scab. Well, let's take a look. You might see some scab there. So you see stuff like this. This is what I think you should do. Scout for infections on cluster fruit and about developing for petal fall to third cover following excessive rains. If you see them, if you see leaf or fruit lesions for petal fall to third cover, use a peroxide product. Because it's going to discuss for safe for bees and other pollinators. I don't even see that. Oh, it must be in the question part. Thanks, Ariana. For the most part, the ones that are going to be worse for bees and pollinators are your copper and sulfur. They're generally not a problem. The things that are really nasty for those are your conventional products like Captan and Mancozeb, which you're not allowed to use anyway. Now, at the same time, this peroxide right there is concentrated peroxidic acid and peroxide. It is organic allowed, and we hate to spray it, mainly because it burns like heck. So if you have birds nesting in your trees, for goodness sakes, just get apple scab and don't spray them with concentrated hydrogen peroxide. And make these applications in the day when the pollinators and other creatures have gone to bed if you need to do that. Now, potassium bicarbonate, like Millstop, can also burn out a scab lesion. It's not going to be as effective, but it's okay. And it also gets powdery mildew. That's what we love about potassium bicarbonate. You might lose more fruit, but then you can feel that you haven't harmed the creatures of the forest that living in your orchard. And we see this stuff. We don't like to spray this at all. So, I'm gonna leave it like that. I do not spray birds with concentrated peroxide. That's just awful. Can't bring myself to do it. Sorry. Anyway, what else do we got? 6th to 8th cover. You're still really, you can strengthen it out some. If we have a really dry Problad Verde, not used it. Probably fine. I would put that in my until you know more, I'd put it in that less than 5 days, less than 5 inches of rain. I think it's going to work fine as a material. A lot of these things work great. You just got to shorten that interval and watch your rain. And this can be a period of time where, like last year, we had a lot of dry weather. If it is dry for weeks on end, you might ask, do I have to spray anything at all? I'd say no. You really don't. When I spray stuff, when it's been dry for 2 to 3 weeks, I do it because the protocol told me to, not because I think it actually is going to do anything. So with that, that should get you to harvest. This is your big gun. These are your other great guns as well. And I find that most of these things are going to work fine. Go follow all those advices with the type of planting style. Give yourself great pruning. Don't skimp on pruning. And keep yourself small aerated trees. And then you can laugh all the way to the bank and make these things work fairly well, particularly in our climate because we're colder and we're not a tropical rainforest. Our cousins to the south work and make apples in a tropical rainforest, and they just have the worst time with this. But we have a real advantage. Let's talk about fire blight before I have to hang up. That's the most exciting one. This is the easiest one to control with biologicals. Wow, that's terrible. Wait, didn't you recommend copper for apple scab? I did, and this is the magic of copper. You can clean up both your overwintering fire blight inoculum and your apple scab inoculum with just your copper applications. You don't need 1,000 of them. Just do 2 to 3, depending on how many you need. And then, well, you can't do this. You can do the SARS, and we'll talk about that. Oh, they got so many options, but here's you. Copper. And then in this case, once you get to that pink stage, even before the fire blight's going, get your coppers on because you're going to get scab and you're going to get other diseases. Start your natural as systemic or required resistance inducers. And this is going to help you with shoot blight when you get there. Talk about some of them. And then you're just going all the way with biologicals. And I would say your natural defense inducers, systemic acquired resistance inducer materials, probably going to be 3 or 4 of them. It gets expensive. Pedifall plus 2 weeks. You really don't want to see this. Once you see this, bad things happen. Bad things happen pretty bad. The one other thing I will say that's really wonderful about the biological products is the same ones that control scab also control fire blight. So if you make an additional fire blight application with one of these biologicals, you will probably pick up some extra scab control and vice versa. If you're using conventional fungicides, you miss out on this benefit because the conventional fungicides are too specific to fungi. Don't really do much for fire blight. But these biologicals, you can get some double duty. Should you then skip a fire blight spray because you already sprayed for scab that week? Probably not, but you could skip a scab spray if you spray a biological for fire blight that week. The consequences are too great. Okay, we know fire blight's bad. High density, tall supraspindle plantings, easy for me to manage for apple scab, have a lot of advantages, high value acreage. Problem is the trees stay very vigorous and young. If you have the big trees, you can laugh in the face of fire blight. You don't have to worry about it. It can't kill them. It's just not powerful enough. These young trees have a lot of young, vigorous tissues, and the resistant rootstocks sound great. Some guys like, hey, why did I get so much fire blight on my galas on B9? The rootstock only gives you resistance to the rootstock, and this whole rest of the tree. Let's get back. Where's my laser pointer? Back to blue. It's gone. Come on, laser pointer. There it is. Is dead, and that doesn't really help you. Once you get any fire blight on the central leader, throw that tree in the garbage and replant. You're going to train a new tree faster than you would trying to make the other one live. And almost everything that tastes great, stores wonderful, has fantastic color, will melt like on fire blight. It's just like a snowman in the middle of July. It's not going to last. And now we get all this warm weather. This is our big danger period. Pedifall to terminal bud set. Okay, and I've noticed recently in Geneva, Western New York, we get a pretty cool to warm bloom period. Hey, we escaped it. And then we get the super hot and dry pedifall weather. And sometimes all it takes is a little sprinkle of rain. And then the next thing you know, it's Memorial Day massacre. All the orchards are dead. They managed to skirt through bloom, and then we had that. And just be aware that when these things occur, dew from the grass, humidity in the canopy, or even water from an application. When they spray water in Washington State, just for, evaporative cooling or whatever, they drive their fire blight epidemics up. So you've got to be very careful. Great Lakes, this is kind of what I'm finding. A lot of these cold blooms, this is 2021, and everything looks pretty great. And you get the pedifall, you're kind of finished. There might be a rat tail left. And then the next thing you know, you can see this extreme weather spike, and that's where all the awful stuff happens. And there's some other pictures. New England is a little better if you're in New England. Sometimes they'll get a warm bloom because their whole the whole season is shifted a little bit, and then they'll escape the petal fall burn, and then they're fine for the most part if they're a couple weeks earlier. And they haven't had this issue as much, but you can't predict what our season's going to be like. Okay, Rafter blossom blight. This is where the whole thing begins. Infections of the flowers, and they're going to be managed with, you can use antibiotics, but I just say you don't really need them. Just forecasted antimicrobials, plant growth regulators, can't use those. Those are off because they're also synthetic, and defense inducers. So you're really looking at those two boogers. Shoot blight. This is nasty. Gets rid of bearing wood. Systemic infections will quickly lead to tree mortality and high density. If you have a big planting, you might lose everything to scab, but you will weather the what's it called? Weather the fire blight. It's not going to be an issue. The best way to beat this, this is the best way in the conventional world. Prexidinial calcium, germalic acid inhibitor. You're left with pruning, and defense inducers are your best bets for the most part. Rootstock blight, I don't really manage it with resistant rootstocks, but once the scion is dead, who cares? And then the other thing that can happen is trauma blight, and can be wounds by hail, wind, and animals, and a bunch of other nonsense. And then you beat this by, your case, probably using organic copper. It will russet out your fruit, but you don't want to lose the entire tree. This is some nasty hail damage we had in Western New York not too long ago. The same things apply. This is the fire blight life cycle. Oozing cankers, they warm up, they make ooze, they get splashed around everywhere. It lands on your flowers at bloom. It gets down into the floral cup, kills the blossom, which then rides the shoot tissue like a water slide to the active growing parts of the plants, bursts out with more ooze. Bees and other pollinators are there out pollinating your crop. They're like, oh, that's even sweeter than the nectar on the flower. Let me get into that mess. And they get that, and then they'll if they can just sit on a young shoot and crack it just enough, flies in particular will ingest and then egest, and out comes the bacteria at 10 to the 10 colonies. And the next thing you know, you got a declining shoot. I'm talking about carnivore. Where does Quava fit in? Quava's a fine one to use as well, George. You can use Quava early on. I just recommend the thicker, heavier, longer residue coppers. Quava's a great one. If I was going to use Quava early on, I would use the 3-quart rate. You can use Quava in the middle of the season at a 2 or 1-quart rate. And that would be right in this phase. So just like with apple scab, all the sanitation, prune out the dead stuff, put on your silver tip copper. They're going to take that inoculum and push that disease progress curve so that when it starts, you got nothing. Oh, I got this much fire blight. It's harvest. Yay. Terminal bud set. It's not harvest in this case. And then, of course, the other things that you do, your antimicrobials and the biologicals will start to squish these secondary infections, particularly your SARs, because they're working on the inside. And now, once you get to this phase, the bacterium's inside the stupid plant, and it's going to bust out. Your biologicals will control this. Only the defense inducers are going to get into those shoots and try to slow the mess down. And they will take that curve, which is going up rapidly. Anytime you see more spores or more bacteria show up, you can just imagine the disease progress shooting up like a rocket. Those biologicals, the defense inducers will take it and they'll smush it down so that you got a flat line and you have no dead shoots at harvest. Okay, use less susceptible cultivars. And you can click on this link and find them. There's no single gene resistance in popular cultivars for apples against fire blight, so we're not going to dwell on that too much. The rootstocks are resistant. But as I mentioned before, and once you get this, you have yourself a child sprinkler system of fire blight. Yes, that tree is still alive down there, but it is all oozing and full of fire blight inoculum, and the next rain is going to grab this and shoot it down the row, and it's going to shoot it over there and in the middle, and everything dies. So when you see it hit that central leader, got to throw that in the bin fast. Okay, postseason. At the end of the season, you see nonsense like this, and the tree has stopped growing, time to get it out. You can leave it to dry. Fire blight can stand cold, but it can't stand drying. We usually say prune out the strikes and dry cankers, let them dry on the orchard floor. It's okay if they're covered by snow. They're not getting enough. They need living tissue to survive, and that snow is not going to cryopreserve them. They're going to be dried up and dead. I've tried to isolate from this type of material, and I'm just smacking my head against a brick wall. I can't get fire blight to come out of there if I want. Now, when you're in the season, look for the cankers. If you see stuff like this, you know you're going to be in for a more challenging season. This is the oozing fire blight cankers, the one I drew the picture of. and crack bark, and you can't get rid of the stuff in the scaffolds. So in this case, if you really didn't think you needed this whole tree, you can't prune this canker out. I'd just get it out of there, particularly if fire blight has become an issue in your planting. Small, old blossom and shoot infections, tiny pruning cuts, they might be cankers. You won't be able to tell. They're not going to ooze. So you just have to apply that copper to be ready. Okay. And this is what that dilute, dormant, fixed copper comes in. You can use the Quavit, use the 3-quart rate. I mean, I love Quavit. It's probably one of my favorite coppers. But if I wanted to go hard early on, I go that Badge 2X. It's a thicker, stickier copper. It's a powder. It's got a high 28. I think Quava's like a 5, but when at 3 quarts, that kind of self-corrects. And then you get the soap from Quava. So that's a great product. The cankers will ooze, and you're going to just kill those cankers with the copper, and it's going to get in the cracks, especially if you use don't use some low 50 gallons an acre dose. If you can, take that gallonage up to 300. And really soak those trees. Now, tight cluster in pink, we'd normally say, how do we put apogee on and shrink the blossoms? Must be getting a lot of stuff in the other chats that I'm not looking at. And then start your defense inducer program at pink. Lifeguard or regalia, these are allowed for organic. They're not as strong as apogee, but they're going to help. And you get them on at pink so that when those flowers get infected later on, they already have their defenses up. You're at King Bloom, you're going to hit Bloom Time Live or Blossom Protect. Bam. Those are good. Those are the ones, those are what I'm going to be recommending as we go through, and I'll tell you why. What about dormant oil with the copper? It's fine, I think, in your case, that oil is going to help the copper stay on forever, and you don't have to worry about applying Captan. If you do dormant oil and copper, maybe don't do as many of the copper applications. Do the silver tip, and then get your insects and your copper that maybe just once, because you don't want to injure your stuff. And that's just going to make the copper last a lot longer, so you won't have to apply as many. It's a good plan. A lot of our growers are a little worried about it, unless they keep that Captan at about 2 to 3 weeks later. Always use the model. Use whatever your extension team is telling you as forecasted risk for fire blight. What is Bloom Time Live? If I talk fast enough, we're going to get there. I'm going to talk about that one. Models are going to over-predict infection risk, but you really don't need more than 3 applications to get the petal fall. You just need one really good, well-timed application is when the fire blight's mostly happening to take it out. Okay, always use model common sense. What do we know? What else? The models will predict this. They'll help you track shoot blight, but shoot blight is a mystery. And once it gets inside the shoots, you can't really predict it. But the models are great. We've already seen the models. We did the examples, Cougar Blight, the EIP model. You can see, like, oh, if today is May 17th and you're looking down and you're like, you know what? I think I need to get something on May 19th. That looks pretty bad. And that's kind of how you use them. And you guys have NUA. If you're in the biological realm, you should start considering whether or not to apply a biological at about an EIP of 70. As you can see, it maxes out at about 150. So this would be the week, clearly, to do it. All right, what else do I want to say? Really don't tell you about with shoot blight, but if you're going for blossom blight, the models are the best. I want to make sure we get to some more stuff. So we talk about things. Here we are. Here's your meat and potatoes. Bloom. I recommend Blossom Protect. This is Areobasidium polulans. It is a natural apple epiphyte, and this is your meat and potatoes for controlling and saving your orchard. This is the one I like to use the most for the moment. It is a fungus, which means if you were to use it in conventional agriculture, you can't put it with a fungicide. But you guys aren't using conventional fungicides. You're using other stuff. And the biopesticides don't work well enough to kill this. So you can put it in there. Would I mix it with a biopesticide? You're probably fine. We've mixed it with fungicides and had great success using it. So this is a fantastic product. This is competitive exclusion. It covers the flower. It also will turn on some natural defenses and really hit hard. And it blocks fire blight, gets the flowers ramped up, and you're good to go. The second one is Bloom Time Live. And this one is just coming to market. It's not released yet. You won't be able to buy it this year, but I thought I would at least tell you about it. Pantoia glomerans. This is a bacterium. Wait, bacteriums don't get killed by fungicides. It can go in with fungicides. It doesn't care. Put all the Captan and whatever nonsense you want on it. It's not going to die. These two are also natural epiphytes. This is probably the most prevalent epiphyte in an apple orchard. So you're taking a naturally present organism and re-putting it back into apples at a very high volume to lock out fire blight. A fantastic practice. I usually go early. I usually start at an EIP of 60 wet weather, and look and see when the infections are coming. Give this a day or two to multiply on the flower surfaces. If it rains, reapply it. All right, you're moving into petal fall now. We got to wrap up because it's almost 2 o'clock and everyone's going to turn into a pumpkin. That means you'll go back to whatever you're doing. Or if you haven't ever seen Cinderella, you know the carriage turns into a pumpkin. Apply regalia or lifeguard. Petal fall 10 to 14 days later. And if things could be getting bad, 21 days later more, if this is what your typical fire blight situation looks like. That's what my orchards look like. But I really hit them hard with doses. What else? These have boosted defense of the plant. Once you're past blossom blight, you need to work on the inside. So regalia, lifeguard. Those are your tickets. If you have rat tail bloom, continue using the other two blossom protect materials. Oh, there it is. This is if you have non-russeting cultivars, I would go blossom protect because blossom protect Aureobasidium is the natural organism that's implicated in fruit russeting. You'd use bloom time live. You can't use it yet. It's not on the market. Was it ever on the market? Yep, it was. And then they took it away because people are only applying streptomycin. Okay, this is where you also use copper. If you're into a part where you're starting to get shoot blight and they're oozing, keep dropping that low-rate copper program 7 to 10 days until terminal bud set. And then your shoots, that doesn't help the shoot blights that's currently coming on the inside, but will protect your crops if they're running into each other and all that other nonsense in a windy storm. Copper can cause fruit russet. I've had excellent success with Quava. I've had excellent success with Magnabon or CS 2005. I had excellent success with Provisto. These other really low-rate coppers are like 5 to 10% metallic copper or less, or in soaps, are generally a little more safer, and you can use them in the summer later on to kind of deal with the issue. The only thing about it is a protectant. Kills surface bacteria, no systemic activity. Be very cautious about what the labels say. If the plant is growing, they'll outgrow the copper residue and you'll have to reapply it. And that's why it's every 7 to 10 days. I love the liquid coppers, low MCE. I do not put adjuvants with these unless the label specifically says so. Adjuvants will make them stick around longer, but you increase the chance of injury. All right, finally, I want to at least cover some modicum of pruning. All right, you should prune out newly developed strikes. Do it on a cool, dry day if you have one. And this is the picture. This is our strike here. And then we're pruning back into at least last year's tissue by 12 inches. Try to go back away from the strike. You can see how the tissue grows. There's like an older tissue line. You can see the lines of old tissue growth on shoots and cut back 12 inches into last year's tissue. If you can get into third-year tissue or just leave a stub, even better. I have a ton of data on this, but we don't have time to see it. If you have fire blight in young trees and it hits the central leader, remove and replant. And then, you know, these 1 to 2 year old actively growing trees, as soon as they get shoot blight, they may not be salvageable by pruning, and you're wasting labor resource, which is super expensive. The bacterium in a really young planting, such as trees shown like this that look like they're barely getting started, is about 3 to 5 days. The bacterium is fully systemic. The bigger one, like I showed here, you're fine. This is like an older, 12 to 14 foot tall tree, about 6 to 8 years old. Trauma blight, we already talked about it. I'm not going to talk about streptomycin. The only thing you got is you got copper and pruning, and you use your best liquid copper product. If it's salvageable, I just, use a liquid biopesticide. If you can salvage the crop. If the crop is completely ruined, just you don't care about russet, you're moving on. And then I'm going to leave it at that. And these are our little plans. And then now ask me a bunch of questions. I don't have to go at noon or 2 o'clock, but you do. So I'm going to stop sharing. And then, you can ask a whole bunch of questions. I'm going to leave the PowerPoint available. Maybe I'll leave the PowerPoint available in case you ask for a particular product. Let's reshare. Go ahead.
Yeah, and feel free to throw these questions in the Q&A, or the chat is just fine
I'm
too.
trying to see the Q&A. What else do we have in the do we have anything else in the Q&A? Oh, there it is. Hold on.
Yeah, there were 3, but I
got 'em.
sent them over, so we should be good for
Great.
Q&A. Any burning questions out there? This is probably a great time. Oh, there we go.
Sil Matrix. Okay. I have used Sil Matrix. I have used it for small fruit, and I have used it for powdery mildew and summer disease. I do like it. Yeah, it can be a very good part of a summer disease program. Are there different ways to nutrient? I mean, the one thing that Deirdre asks is that Sil Matrix is in theory supposed to be strengthening the cell walls. with silicon, because that's what it is. So be careful with your calcium, because if you mess around too much of that, you can end up with bitter pit, and then the whole thing is lost just for disease control. But the Sil Matrix in theory is supposed to do that. It's not like a silver bullet, but it does work pretty well. It does work well. I love it for summer disease, though. That's sort of your late season product. I do like it in strawberry. I do like it in I even like it in greenhouse strawberry. We do a lot of CEA now too. I don't know if it's labeled in greenhouses anymore, but I would love it in there.
Awesome. Well, it
Great.
is 1 o'clock Central Time.
That's
Looks
right.
like we have a
1 o'clock
couple
Central Time to
people
me. Yep.
dropping off. So we'll go ahead and wrap
Great.
up. Just, yeah, I want to say thank you so much
You're welcome.
again for joining 2 of our webinars. And yeah, I think people learned a lot. This was a really, really highly requested talk. So super
Yeah.
appreciate your time and
No
thanks
problem.
everyone for joining.
You're welcome. All righty. Well, I will let everyone get back to it.
All right.
Thanks, Kerik. This was
You're
great.
welcome. Thank you
All
for
right.
having me.
Take care.
Thank you so much.